You won't believe what just unfolded on the morning exchange. Mel Gibson, the iconic action hero and acclaimed filmmaker, left Whoopi Goldberg utterly speechless during a live broadcast, a twist no one anticipated. The studio audience exploded in stunned excitement. What began as a seemingly routine segment, spotlights blazing, the crowd erupting in eager applause, and hosts Whoopi Goldberg, Sandra Harris, and Barbara Scott donning their trademark grins quickly revealed its hidden purpose. This wasn't an invitation for pleasantries. It was an ambush disguised as hospitality. With her familiar cadence, Whoopi welcomed the guest. Joining us today is Mel Gibson, a Hollywood icon, visionary director, and arguably the most polarizing figure in entertainment. The words were gracious, but her gaze betrayed a calculated edge. Mel stepped onto the stage with unwavering poise, clad in a sleek black suit, his piercing blue eyes sweeping the room. He sat down, offering a subtle, knowing smile that hinted at preparation. And so began the showdown. The morning exchange wasn't a talk show that day. It had transformed into a theater of confrontation. Before diving in, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and remember to subscribe so you won't miss what's next. The energy inside the studio was electric, the crowd leaning forward, a hush of anticipation spreading like ripples beneath the blaze of overhead lights. Gibson's gaze was locked on Goldberg, whose smile had vanished, replaced by the laser focus of someone preparing to strike. Cameras zoomed in to capture every raised eyebrow, every flicker of expression. Sandra Harris wore a faint smirk, her eyes glimmering with mischief. Barbara Scott clutched her pen like a weapon poised for its mark. The arena was drawn. The first salvo loomed. Goldberg leaned toward him, her tone smooth, yet edged with steel. All right, Mel. Let's talk about this tariff policy you support, Trump's 100% tax on foreign film imports. Do you honestly believe this will rescue Hollywood, or are we just throttling global creativity under the guise of patriotism? The question struck like a well-placed jab. The audience buzzed, some heads nodding in quiet agreement. Yet Gibson remained unmoved. He sat at ease, hands resting gently, though his eyes held the fire of unshakable belief. It's about safeguarding American livelihoods, Whoopi. The film industry employs millions, from gaffers and editors to set carpenters. When productions chase cheap labor abroad, our people suffer. Just last year alone, 30,000 union roles vanished overseas. Tariffs restore balance. His voice was calm and deliberate, each syllable cutting clean through the tension in the room. Murmurs arose among the audience, some surprised, others contemplative. Goldberg arched a brow, pressing forward. But you're a director, Mel. You know cinema thrives on global exchange, not economic fences. These tariffs could cripple indie filmmakers, inflate budgets, reduce diversity in storytelling. Is that your vision of creativity? Her tone hinted at disdain, as if his stance echoed from a bygone era. Gibson gave a slight nod, a glint of intensity in his eyes. Collaboration doesn't mean exploitation. Independent voices are drowning beneath a flood of low-cost foreign productions. Tariffs force studios to reinvest in our talent pool. Last year, 70% of major studios' budgets went abroad. If we channel that back into our own industry, we could generate tens of thousands of jobs, from sound stages to special effects. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. A few heads nodded. A smattering of applause followed. Behar pounced, voice tinged with mockery. So you want to turn the movie business into some kind of patriotic shrine? The world doesn't work like that anymore, Mel. He turned toward her, gaze level and clear. Globalization shouldn't mean abandoning American workers' joy. I filmed across continents, Australia, Ireland, Mexico. I respect international artistry. But when profit margins dictate that we discard our own, it's time to draw the line. Tariffs mark that boundary. His reply struck like flint against steel. Behar blinked, her confidence briefly shaken. Goldberg seized the moment, voice sharpening. And what of the audience, Mel? They crave stories, not price hikes. They don't care where a film is shot. Are you really doing them a favor by pushing up ticket costs? The crowd leaned in again. Gibson tilted his head slightly, gaze fixed on Goldberg. People want great films, yes, but quality begins with fair wages for those behind the scenes. If saving thousands of jobs adds a few cents to a ticket, I think viewers will understand. And tariffs won't inflate prices, they'll reduce the bloated profits of executives. Last year alone, the top 3 studio heads pocketed over $200 million combined, while crews scraped by on temp contracts. So tell me, who's really costing the audience? His answer landed hard. The applause this time came louder, more insistent. Hostin finally joined in, her voice calm, yet razor-sharp. You say this is about jobs, Mel, but tariffs can lead to trade wars. Retaliation. What happens when foreign markets shut out American films in return? That's a real risk. Her words struck with precision. Gibson gave a slow nod, acknowledging the weight of her point. I have considered that, Sonny. But Hollywood isn't some fragile bystander. We lead the global market in cultural exports, $15 billion annually in U.S. films sold abroad. Other nations might respond, yes, but they rely on our stories more than we rely on theirs. Tariffs aren't a wall, they're a bargaining chip. And by bringing production back home, we make our industry stronger, more resilient. His response was firm, deliberate, so logically constructed that Hostin found herself pressing her lips together momentarily without retort. Applause swelled, more enthusiastic now, with several audience members rising to their feet, eyes bright with something close to admiration. Sensing the balance shift, Goldberg made a deft attempt to reclaim command of the exchange. Mel, you sound persuasive, sure, she said, a touch of edge creeping into her voice, but this is Trump's policy we're talking about, and let's be honest, he's never been an ally of the arts. Aren't you just following his lead? It was no longer a policy question, it was a character blow designed to force Gibson onto the defensive. He let out a quiet chuckle, not in irritation, but with the calm amusement of someone who'd seen the move coming long before it arrived. I don't carry anyone's banner, Whoopi. I'm a filmmaker, and I advocate for the people who keep this industry alive. If a policy, no matter who proposes it, safeguards American livelihoods, then I'll support it. Not for Trump. For the families behind the cameras, the union crews, the freelancers hanging by a thread. The folks here, they get that. He gestured lightly toward the crowd, drawing them closer to his cause. The room answered with thunderous applause echoing off the studio walls. People stood, clapping with fervor. Goldberg narrowed her eyes, a flicker of unease surfacing. Behar and Hostin exchanged quiet glances, realizing that Gibson wasn't just weathering the storm, he was charting its course. From behind the set, a producer's voice crackled in someone's earpiece, cut to commercial, he's hijacking the narrative. But the cameras didn't flinch. They kept rolling, immortalizing the moment Gibson transformed a challenge into a calculated strike. The energy in the room hummed, still charged from the earlier clash over trade policy. Mel Gibson sat upright, composed yet unmistakably alert, like a seasoned prizefighter who had absorbed the first blows and was now measuring the next. Goldberg, composed on the surface, gripped the edge of the table ever so slightly, her jaw tight with resolve. She drew a slow breath and lowered her voice. Mel, you talk a lot about jobs. But let's not skirt around the bigger picture. You've been one of Trump's more outspoken defenders, a president many feel has fractured the country. Are you honestly proud to align with that? The question sliced through the air like a blade. A soft gasp rustled through the crowd. Gibson tilted his head, meeting her eyes with the calm of someone who had long since weighed the accusation. I stand with policies that prioritize Americans, he said quietly. Trump's not flawless, far from it. But look at the facts. Before the pandemic hit, unemployment was the lowest it had been in half a century. Black Americans, women, Latino communities, they were gaining real economic ground. I'm not cheering a man, I'm supporting outcomes. There was no bravado, only a certain moral weight behind the words. A low murmur spread through the audience, punctuated by a few nods, some visibly swayed by his data-driven stance. Goldberg, unwilling to yield the moment, pressed again, her voice sharp and cutting. But it's not all numbers, Mel. Trump's rhetoric, his policies, immigration, race, they've stoked division. Don't you see that? Or are you just protecting your bank account? It was a provocation, this time personal, meant to draw fire. A few claps rippled in agreement. Yet Gibson remained unshaken. He tapped the table lightly, scanning the room, then returned his eyes to Goldberg. Division doesn't come from one person, Whoopi. I've driven across this country, from quiet towns in Pennsylvania to the bustle of Phoenix. People don't obsess over speeches. They want security, work, dignity for their families. If someone delivers that, I'll support them. And yes, I've called Trump out when I've disagreed. His media handling? A mess. I'm not blind. Then he paused, his voice dipping lower. But tell me, have you ever wondered if this very show deepens the divide by mostly featuring voices that echo each other? His question landed like a spark on dry tinder. Cheers erupted, some clapping, others laughing with surprise. A man in the back row stood and applauded, face glowing with energy. Goldberg faltered for a beat, lips pressed in a tight line, caught mid-thought. Quick on her feet, Behar leapt in to shift momentum. Oh, please, Mel? Don't act like you're neutral. You're a Trump man, and we all know what that means, conservative, backward-facing. Do you really think the future's behind us? The sarcasm hung in the air like fog, though her eyes betrayed unease. Gibson responded with a clipped, confident laugh. Joy, I'm not chasing the past, I'm fighting for a country where people feel seen. Not ruled by pundits or panels. I've been telling stories through film for over 4 decades. And if there's one truth I've learned, it's that politics come and go. But human stories? They endure. Whether it's Trump, Biden, or whoever comes next, I'm only interested in policies that lift people up. The audience roared in response, applause rising like a wave breaking upon the shore. Hostin, sensing the shift and choosing her moment, spoke with composed precision. Mel, you say you listen to the people. But Trump's been criticized often for neglecting minority communities. With your reach, don't you think you have an obligation to speak up when he crosses a line? It was a shrewd question, rooted in ethics rather than politics. The crowd hushed, hanging on his reply. I do have that responsibility, Gibson said without hesitation. And I've used it. I've met with Trump, challenged him, especially on social matters where I think he's missed the mark. But I've also seen him do good. He's invested in neglected neighborhoods, pushed for enterprise zones, expanded job training programs. I'm not here to excuse every decision. I'm here to say judge leaders by their actions, not just the noise around them. His words rang out with gravity and balance. Hostin blinked, thoughtful, momentarily quiet. Applause burst forth again, resounding and genuine. A woman near the center stood up, raising her hand in solidarity, eyes alight with emotion. Sensing the shift in the room, Goldberg made a last-ditch effort to recapture control. Mel, you speak well, I'll give you that. But you can't deny that Trump has harmed a lot of people. By aligning with him, you've chosen a side. Don't you see how dangerous that is? The question was laced with accusation, a rhetorical snare meant to pin Gibson into a corner. But his gaze never wavered. I'm not choosing sides, Whoopi, I'm choosing the truth. And the truth is, every political figure stumbles. What we can't allow is for the media, or even programs like this one, to decide who gets redemption and who doesn't. The people here, he said, gesturing gently toward the audience, they see through the theater. They want truth, not scripted outrage. His voice was low, sure, drawing the viewers into his current like a tide pulling toward shore. Goldberg inhaled deeply, her eyes narrowing, as if preparing her sharpest blade. Behar leaned forward, eyes narrowed, while Hostin adjusted her glasses, her fingertips hovering over her notes. Goldberg lifted her chin, her tone measured, deliberate, and sharpened to a point. You want to talk truth, Mel? Then let's confront yours. You've made offensive remarks. You've been accused of anti-Semitism, racism. How can anyone trust you to defend American culture when your own past is filled with such stains? A hush fell over the room. The air tightened as every eye fixed on Gibson, waiting to see whether he would dodge, fold, or meet it head-on. He didn't rush. Instead, he leaned in slightly, the weight of his silence making the room lean with him. I don't run from my past, Whoopi. I own it. I've said things I regret. Done things I'm not proud of. But for decades, I've worked to show, not through words, but through actions, that I'm not the man I was in those moments. He paused, turning slowly to take in the audience. Some leaned forward, others nodded, their expressions softening. I made Hacksaw Ridge to honor a man who stood for peace in a time of war. The Passion of the Christ to portray faith at its most raw and redemptive. Those stories speak to who I am now. The crowd was quiet, reflective. A few nodded subtly. Goldberg, seeing sympathy gather in the room, went on the offensive again. Words are cheap, Mel. But your words hurt real people, Jewish communities, people of color. Do you really think a few films are enough to erase that pain? Her tone was colder now, echoing across the room. A ripple of agreement passed through a portion of the crowd. Gibson's lips curved into a faint smile, not triumphant, but resolute. I'm not trying to erase anything. I've stood in front of communities I've offended. I've apologized. I've listened. I've built bridges. But let's not forget, Whoopi, you've defended people for saying controversial things under the banner of free speech. Why is it that I don't get that same grace? Why don't I get the chance to grow? The question struck its mark. Goldberg's mouth tightened. Her eyes flickered. Applause broke out again, this time sharper, cheers rising, arms lifted in support. Behar opened her mouth to cut in, her tone dipped in sarcasm. Oh, come on, Mel. Don't try to spin this. You said appalling things. And now what, because you say you've changed, we should give you a standing ovation? The audience isn't that naive. Her arms crossed, voice pointed. But Gibson met her gaze with calm conviction. I'm not asking for applause, Joy. I'm asking for fairness. I've given decades to this industry, working with artists from every background, creating opportunities without headlines. You want receipts? Fine. I've funded indie films in Detroit. Helped emerging Black directors in Atlanta get their first projects off the ground. But that doesn't make a headline, does it? It's easier to keep me labeled as the villain, it's neater that way. His voice cut deep, not with bitterness, but with measured force. Behar blinked and turned away. The applause this time came in waves, loud and sustained. A woman near the front rose, raising her hand high, her eyes glistening with unspoken gratitude. Hostin, still holding to her role as the voice of measured skepticism, stepped forward with a calm, composed challenge. Mel, I hear what you're saying. And I respect the work you've done. But the public deserves consistency. How do they know this isn't performance, just an effort to rehabilitate your image? It was a thoughtful question designed to test integrity, not merely expose contradiction. The studio quieted again, all attention on Gibson. Consistency isn't about never falling, Sonny. It's about getting up. Every time. It's about trying to do better no matter how far you've come. I'm not acting. I live what I say. If people want to know who I really am, they can look at my work. Look at the communities I've helped. Look at the stories I've chosen to tell. That's where the truth lives. His voice was unwavering, his expression grounded in something deeper than defensiveness. Hostin hesitated, her brow creased, not with doubt but thought. The audience erupted again, louder than ever, an ovation rising from the soul of the crowd. Goldberg, sensing the room slipping from her grasp, made one final effort to pull the reins. You say actions matter, but your past still casts a long shadow, Mel. Do you really think people are just going to forget because you've made a few moving films? Her tone was still pointed, but something in it had dulled, as if she already sensed the answer. Gibson looked her in the eye, his voice like a stone in a river, steadfast, unmoved. I'm not asking anyone to forget, Whoopi. I'm asking them to see the whole story. The good, the bad, and everything in between. If we're not allowed to evolve, to redeem ourselves, then what's the point of any of this? I believe the people here are wise enough to see through the noise, to see me. The room roared in response. Applause thundered through the studio, cheers rising like waves under a full moon. Backstage, a producer muttered into a headset, he's running the show now. At the table, Goldberg's fingers curled tightly, her face composed but taut. Behar and Hostin sat in silence, eyes flicking between each other, their earlier confidence flickering like the last flame on a candle. With quiet command and unwavering presence, Gibson had transformed a pointed attack into a formidable counteroffensive, leaving the morning exchange momentarily staggered. Composed but resolute, he adjusted his collar with a slow, deliberate motion, the fire in his eyes unquenched and steady. Goldberg's voice cut through the charged air, low, deliberate, sharp as drawn steel. Mel, you speak of change, but let's widen the lens. You stand behind Trump, a man many believe endangers free speech with his threats against the press and public condemnations of the media. You're a filmmaker. Doesn't that alarm you? The question thundered through the studio more than a challenge, it was an ethical reckoning. The audience stirred, hushed voices whispering in anticipation of his reply. Gibson tilted his head slightly, the gleam in his eye suggesting he had anticipated this very moment. Free speech is the soul of this country, Whoopi. I've seen it tested, stretched, and sometimes abused, from movie sets to the Capitol floor. But let's be honest, free speech doesn't mean freedom from consequence. It means the right to speak, to question, to defend a belief. I don't co-sign every word Trump utters. But I do see a greater threat, selective storytelling where the media filters facts through an ideological lens. His voice was steady, each syllable etched with gravity. The studio fell into silence, every breath caught in the weight of his words. Goldberg leaned forward, her brow furrowed. Selective storytelling? Are you accusing us? This platform is built for dialogue, for pushing tough questions. Or can't you handle that? Applause followed, measured but affirming. The question was blunt, a challenge to his backbone. Gibson smiled, cool and cutting, a swordsman waiting for the next strike to parry. I don't shy from hard questions, Whoopi. I welcome them. But what I see here isn't real dialogue, it's performance. It's ambush theater dressed up as open discussion. I've watched this show long enough to know that guests with different views aren't debated, they're cornered. Is that what passes for free speech now? He swept the room with a glance, as if inviting the audience to see what he saw. I believe people deserve both sides of the story, not just one that's been polished to fit a narrative. Cheers erupted. Some stood again, eyes blazing with conviction. The tide had turned. Unable to stay silent, Behar interjected, her tone cutting and theatrical. Oh, spare us the victim act, Mel. You were invited here. You're getting airtime. If you can't take the heat, don't step into the kitchen. Her arms folded, gaze locked and unrelenting. Gibson turned toward her, his expression unmoved. Joy, I've lived in the heat. I've made films under fire, stood in the line of public outrage, and kept creating. But free speech isn't about setting someone up for ridicule just to entertain the audience. It's about real conversation. And actually, he added, turning slightly, I brought something to show you. He nodded toward the wings. A moment later, the studio's large screen flickered to life. A rapid montage played, past clips of the morning exchange, each one showing conservative guests interrupted, mocked, dismissed. The audience gasped, soft murmurs cascading through the studio. A woman in the back row covered her mouth, stunned. The final clip ended on an older exchange, Goldberg's voice echoing, "What's free speech if we can't laugh in the face of wrong opinions?" The lights brightened. Gibson turned to her, voice low but thunderous in effect. "Whoopi, if laughing at dissent is the bar for free speech, then this isn't a space for dialogue. It's a stage. And this audience deserves more than a performance." The crowd exploded, cheers and applause crashing like a storm. A man in the front row raised a fist, eyes lit with unfiltered energy. Goldberg appeared shaken for the first time, her hands tensing on the table, eyes flickering with uncertainty. Hostin leaned forward, attempting to anchor the chaos with reason. "Mel, you're criticizing us, but freedom of speech includes the right to challenge and critique. Doesn't that count too?" It was a fair point, but her voice lacked the force it once carried. Gibson nodded respectfully, yet his voice remained firm. "Absolutely, Sonny. Critique is essential, but it has to be honest. What we see here is a performance masquerading as journalism. You don't let the audience decide, you lead them to the answer you've already chosen. And I've made enough films to know a good story doesn't just reflect the director's view. It reflects humanity. Let this show be that kind of story." Applause surged again, louder than before. Hostin glanced down, eyes distant, lips slightly parted as if searching for a retort that wouldn't come. Goldberg, determined to make one final stand, pressed forward. "Fairness, Mel? You say that, but you're standing here defending a man who once called the media the enemy of the people. That doesn't disturb you?" Her voice trembled slightly, an edge of desperation surfacing at last. Gibson turned to her, gaze unwavering, voice calm yet cutting. "I'm not defending every phrase that's ever left Trump's mouth. I'm defending something bigger, the right to be heard, to speak without being boxed in by bias. If the media wants to claim the truth, then it has to open the floor to every truth. Don't guide the audience, trust them. They know how to listen." He turned to the audience, hand outstretched like a benediction. "I believe they're smarter than all of this." The studio was electric. The crowd rose in a wave, clapping, shouting, some with tears welling in their eyes. The air itself seemed to reverberate with the force of what had been said. It felt like something had shifted permanently. Gibson remained seated, composed, eyes glinting with quiet triumph, like a warrior who had fought clean and left the battlefield standing tall. Across from him, Goldberg stared down at the desk, her hands loose, her expression dazed. Behar, her silver hair tousled, bit her lip, her thoughts elsewhere. Hostin sat still, one hand resting on a stack of bent notes, her eyes downcast like a litigator reckoning with a case irreversibly lost. In a final attempt to recover her footing, Goldberg cleared her throat and forced a smile that rang hollow. "Thank you, Mel, for a spirited conversation. Audience, what did you make of all this?" Her voice, once commanding, faltered now, thinner, drained of the charisma that usually held the room. The applause came swiftly, not for her, but for Gibson. A woman in the front row leapt to her feet, cheering, her hand raised high, her eyes burning with the fire of shared truth. The applause surged like a rising tide, overtaking the studio. Goldberg looked down, her expression unraveling, the weight of the moment pressing into her. Gibson stood, adjusting his suit jacket with quiet dignity, his gaze sweeping across the crowd with warmth and gravity. "Thank you for hearing me," he said, voice low and clear, the tone of a man who had completed a mission, not won a fight. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to remind us all, we all have the right to speak and the right to be heard. Keep chasing truth." The audience roared. Some shouted his name as if hailing a folk hero. Their cheers echoed through the studio like a standing ovation in a theater not used to being upstaged. Behar, unable to stomach the reverence, broke in with a brittle tone. "Oh, Mel, you certainly know how to work a crowd. But I'm sure we've got more to say, right?" Her smile was forced, a cracked mask on an actor unsure of her next line. Gibson offered a courteous nod, eyes gleaming with unspoken sharpness. "Joy," he replied gently, "I think the audience has said enough." The room broke into laughter and applause again, swift, spontaneous, and unmistakably real. Hostin, still clutching for poise, attempted a lifeline. "Mel, we appreciate your point of view. The morning exchange is, and always will be, a place for real dialogue. We hope you'll join us again." Her words were composed, but her eyes betrayed the tension as if she knew the show had just taken a blow it wouldn't easily recover from. Gibson smiled, warmly but with intent. "Sonny, if you're ready for an honest debate, one not written in advance, I'll come back. But next time, let truth lead the conversation." Cheers followed like thunder. He stepped from his chair, his movement unhurried, gaze sweeping the studio for one last time. In his mind, memories stirred of years in exile, nights of solitude, the weight of redemption. Hollywood had once shut its doors on him, but today he had opened another door for himself and for many who felt silenced. As he exited the set, the audience remained on their feet, applause echoing long after he vanished behind the curtain. A man in the back shouted, "Thank you, Mel." It felt less like the end of a segment and more like the closing moment of a revolution. Behind the scenes, panic rippled like wildfire. A flustered producer barked into a headset, "Who cleared that montage? This is a disaster." Another shook his head, muttering he flipped the whole show upside down. In the control room, screens lit up with incoming alerts. Social media had erupted. Comments poured in by the thousands, cascading across platforms. On screen, headlines began flashing. Mel Gibson dismantles daytime talk show in real time. Truth bomb on live TV, Gibson leaves host stunned. The exchange no one expected and no one will forget. Clips were clipped, shared, and reposted. A flood of posts dominated every major platform. One user wrote, "Mel Gibson just turned the morning exchange into rubble. Who's calling him washed up now?" Beneath a viral video of the moment he aired the montage. Another post, already shared 10,000 times, read, "Whoopi thought she had the upper hand." Gibson left her speechless and standing ovation followed. Memes exploded across timelines. One showed Gibson, arms outstretched, overlaid with "Truth, one daytime TV, 0. Another showed Goldberg mid-reaction, captioned, "When the script doesn't go your way." Video creators jumped on the moment. YouTube flooded with thumbnails like "Gibson silences the hosts in under 5 minutes, racking up millions of views." On TikTok, a viral reenactment of the montage scene, complete with dramatic sound effects and reactions, had users laughing, cheering, and debating. In the comments, "Never liked Gibson, but this? Respect. They tried to drag him and he came with receipts." The media just got a taste of its own medicine. Users began digging through old episodes, spotlighting past instances of one-sided interrogations, validating Gibson's critique. The press scrambled to respond. Reuters led with, "Mel Gibson's television rebellion shakes daytime talk." Variety published a deeper dive, "Gibson didn't debate, he deconstructed." Fox News hailed him as a champion of free speech. Even neutral outlets such as The Atlantic noted, "Gibson's appearance may mark a turning point in how we engage dissenting voices on air." Back on the set, Goldberg sat in silence. The lights dimmed around her like a curtain falling on a play that had lost its plot. Her eyes were vacant, lips pressed into a thin line. The studio that once thrived on control now pulsed with the consequences of losing it. Behar leaned toward Hostin, voice trembling. "We misjudged him." Hostin gave a slow nod, gathering her scattered notes with a quiet air of resignation. "Completely." The audience filed out in clusters, buzzing. Near the exit, a group of young women huddled together, phones glowing. "I've never seen Whoopi speechless before," one murmured. "Mel didn't just speak," another replied. "He broke the spell." Off to the side, an older man adjusted his coat, a satisfied smile on his face. He didn't argue. He illuminated. As the studio lights cooled to a quiet hush, the storm had only just begun. From one studio exchange, the ripple had become a wave, spreading across platforms and screens like wildfire across dry grass. Out beyond the walls, Gibson stepped into the golden light of the late afternoon, his face serene, his stride unhurried. In his eyes, neither arrogance nor triumph, but peace. A man who had reclaimed his voice and reminded the world what one voice, when unshaken, could do. The quote spread like wildfire. "The audience deserves more than a scripted drama." Gibson's line, once spoken in the heat of the studio, had now become a rallying cry plastered across headlines, quoted in opinion columns, and echoed in countless social media posts. At the network's headquarters, the mood was dire. What had begun as a routine episode had ignited a firestorm. In one of the executive boardrooms, tensions flared. Senior producers exchanged heated words, faces drawn and grim. A leaked internal memo later obtained by Deadline read like a concession. "We underestimated Gibson. This is the show's most serious crisis in over a decade." The fallout was swift. Advertisers ranging from beauty brands to family food staples began severing ties, citing reputational risk. One marketing director told Variety, "The audience is turning against the show. We can't afford the association." Within a single day, 3 major sponsors pulled their contracts, blows that cut deeply into the show's budget. Backstage, the atmosphere was no less fractured. Goldberg, once the show's steady hand, retreated behind a locked door, refusing press or contact. A source close to her confided that she felt not just ambushed, but abandoned. She's rethinking everything, the source said quietly. Even her faith in the show's direction. Behar, unable to remain silent, tweeted simply, "We just did our job. People need to calm down." The backlash was instant, thousands of replies labeling her a sore loser, some cruel, others reflective. Hostin, typically composed, issued no public comment. But whispers in the media said she'd confided to friends she regretted how unprepared they had been. "He caught us flat-footed," one reportedly said. While the show reeled, Gibson seemed to glide forward, untouched. The very next evening, he appeared at a film premiere in Los Angeles, smiling, calm, the picture of quiet confidence. Applause erupted as he arrived. A fan lifted a sign that read, "Thank you for speaking for us, Mel." He declined to comment on the interview directly, but in a short variety piece he offered a single sentence. "I didn't come to destroy anyone. I came to remind people that the truth is always worth fighting for." That line alone was shared millions of times. A symbol had been born. On social media, the storm only grew. A page launched by fans, Mel Gibson, truth defender, attracted tens of thousands within hours. Clips of the interview were dissected frame by frame. Comments poured in beneath each one. "He spoke for the silenced. That wasn't a meltdown, it was a masterclass." Supporters of the show tried to push back, insisting Gibson had simply played the victim. But their rebuttals were drowned by a tidal wave of public support. One widely shared post summarized the mood perfectly. "He didn't just out-argue them. He exposed the script." By the next morning, the shockwaves were being measured. Media analysts warned that the morning exchange might need to revamp or face permanent decline. Viewership dropped by 15% in just 1 week. An internal report sent to advertisers confirmed what many feared: the audience's trust had been shaken. Behind the scenes, the network scrambled. Staff were enrolled in emergency editorial training sessions on handling ideological diversity. The show had branded itself for years as a platform for truth, but now it faced a deeper question: whose truth? Online, longtime viewers posted reflections tinged with disappointment. "This used to be where I heard all sides," one wrote. "Now I see it was always one side louder than the rest." The show, once a staple of American media, had arrived at a precipice. Reinvent or recede? Goldberg remained silent in the public eye. But a friend shared with People that she had spent long hours scrolling through comment threads, trying to understand the shift. While she never acknowledged defeat publicly, internal discussions reportedly began on inviting more diverse ideological guests, a quiet but meaningful shift. Behar, though combative by nature, softened her tone in later tweets, calling for real conversation, not rehearsed debate. Hostin, in a brief appearance on CNN, admitted, "We've learned something. The audience wants fairness. And we have to listen." These weren't just reactions. They were revelations. Gibson hadn't merely sparred with them, he had forced the show to face itself. Meanwhile, the wave of momentum around Gibson only grew. The film he'd come to promote, previously flying under the radar, saw a massive boost. Packed theaters, sold-out screenings, it was clear audiences weren't just showing up for a movie. They were rallying behind the man who had stood, unflinching, against a media juggernaut. The Hollywood Reporter wrote, "Gibson doesn't make films. He wages truth through story." And last week, he made the entire country listen. He had become more than a filmmaker. He had become a symbol for those disillusioned by the institutions that once claimed to speak for them. For Gibson, though, it was never about glory. Standing alone on the deck of his Malibu home, the ocean wind brushing past him, he reflected quietly, not on the applause, not on the headlines, but on the years he'd spent out of favor, rebuilding, repenting, evolving. The battle on that soundstage had never been about winning. It had been about proving he'd never stopped believing in truth. A close friend, speaking to Deadline, offered the final word. Mel never wanted to destroy the morning exchange. He just wanted it to do better. And maybe, just maybe, he succeeded. The story of Mel Gibson and the morning exchange did not end with a single broadcast, it became a case study in cultural consciousness. In classrooms, on podcasts, and across digital forums, the moment was dissected, debated, and ultimately redefined. Media scholars began referring to it as the Gibson effect, a phenomenon where sincerity and sharp logic wielded by one determined voice could pierce through the polished armor of institutional narrative. A professor from NYU told the New York Times, "Gibson reminded us that audiences are not passive spectators. When given the space, they shape the story." As twilight settled over the now silent set of the morning exchange, its dim, tired lights stood in stark contrast to another scene across the country, Gibson standing beneath the shimmer of stage lights in Hollywood, welcomed by a standing ovation. On one side, the hollow echo of a shaken media empire, on the other, a steady flame of unyielding resolve. Gibson's impact was never simply about victory. It became a broader call, a challenge to the media, to society, and to each of us. It was about truth not shaped by scripts, fairness not framed by spin. In the hearts of millions, he was no longer just the actor or the director. He had become the man who stood up, not merely for himself, but for those who believed their voice still mattered. His Showdown echoed the deeper fault lines running through American life: political division, eroding trust in media, and a growing battle over who controls the narrative. In a world where timelines overflow with outrage, headlines blur with bias, and free speech becomes a battleground, Gibson's stance became a mirror reflecting back the questions many had dared not ask. Through it all, his precise breakdown of film tariffs, his clear defense of workers, his measured admission of past failures, and the moment he revealed the montage exposing the show's bias, he had done what few dared: challenged the system on its own stage. The reaction was seismic. From the spontaneous cheers in the studio to the online frenzy sparked by #Mel Gibson owns the view, it became clear Americans were hungry. Not for drama, but for honesty. For fairness. For a voice that wasn't afraid to challenge the curated script. ABC's crisis, lost sponsors, public backlash, emergency ethics training wasn't just a PR problem. It was a reckoning. A media institution had been held to account not by protest or boycotts, but by the voice of one man refusing to follow the script. And Gibson's personal arc, from public scrutiny to redemptive symbol, offered a roadmap through modern controversy. He didn't deny his past. He addressed it. He didn't shout over his critics. He met them head-on with facts and self-awareness. His journey became proof that in a landscape riddled with cynicism, the truth, when delivered with conviction, still resonates. So what's the lesson? In a divided, noisy world, when faced with opposition, be it from colleagues, institutions, or public perception, follow Gibson's example. Come prepared. Own your truth. Don't perform, engage. And when the tide turns against you, use it to sail forward, not sink. Like Gibson, acknowledge the missteps. Let your actions rebuild trust. And above all, speak clearly, boldly, respectfully. In a democracy built on free expression, your voice matters. Let it be rooted in truth, shaped by reason, and delivered with courage. Because just like that audience who stood and clapped not for a celebrity, but for a principle, each of us has the power to demand better, to build dialogue instead of division. And perhaps that is the real legacy, not of a man who won a debate, but of a moment that reminded us all, when truth stands tall, even the loudest stage must listen.